The diner door slammed shut, the bell above it jangling like a warning shot. Earl, 81 years old, hunched over his coffee, his gnarled hands trembling not from age but from the sting of a fresh slap across his weathered cheek. The thug, a hulking figure in a stained denim jacket, loomed over him, sneering. "Old man, you don't belong here." Earl's blue eyes, sharp despite the years, held steady. He'd faced worse bullets in Vietnam, shrapnel tearing through his leg, the ache of losing his wife. But this, a punk in a greasy diner in small-town Ohio, spitting venom because Earl had dared to wear a faded rainbow pin on his jacket. It cut deeper than shrapnel ever could. The pin was for Jake, his son, his gay son, the son he hadn't seen in 3 years, not since the fight that broke them both. The diner was a time capsule, checkered floors, cracked red vinyl booths, and a jukebox humming Johnny Cash. It was Earl's sanctuary, a place to sip coffee and remember simpler days. But tonight, it felt like a battlefield. The thug, who called himself Trey, had overheard Earl talking to the waitress about Jake, about pride parades, about love being love. Trey didn't like that. Not one bit. Faggots and their supporters, he'd growled, loud enough for the whole diner to hear. Ought to be run out of town. The slap came next, sharp and humiliating, silencing the chatter of the few late-night patrons. Earl didn't flinch. He'd learned long ago that pain was just a visitor, not a resident. But inside, his heart churned. Not for the slap, but for Jake. For the years lost to silence. To Earl's own stubborn pride. To the words he'd never said, "I'm proud of you." He stared at the coffee, black as the guilt pooling in his chest, and wondered if he'd ever get the chance to say it. Across town, Jake roared through the streets on his Harley, the wind biting his face. At 35, he was a man carved from hard choices, tattoos snaking up his arms, a leather jacket patched with the Hell's Angels insignia, and a heart that still bled for the father who'd once called him a disappointment. He hadn't planned to come back to this nowhere town. Hadn't planned to face the memories of diner breakfasts with Earl, of fishing trips before everything went wrong. But the call from Sally, the diner's waitress, changed everything. "Your dad's in trouble, Jake. Some asshole hit him. He needs you." Jake's grip tightened on the handlebars, his knuckles white. Trouble wasn't new to him. He'd found a family in the Angels rough, loyal, and unapologetic. They didn't care that he was gay, only that he rode hard and stood tall. But Earl was different. Earl was home, even if home had cracks too deep to mend. Or so he'd thought. The diner's neon sign flickered as Jake pulled into the lot, his bike growling like a beast. Behind him, the rumble of engines signaled his crew, 6 Angels, leather-clad and fierce, ready to back him up. Jake wasn't here for a fight. Not really. He was here for Earl. But the fire in his gut told him this night wouldn't end quietly. Inside, Trey was still holding court, his buddies laughing as he mocked Earl's silence. "What's wrong, Grandpa? No fight left in ya?" The other patrons, truckers, a couple of teens, an old woman knitting in the corner, kept their heads down. Fear hung thick in the air, like grease on the grill. Earl sipped his coffee, his jaw tight, and said nothing. He didn't need to. The bell above the door jangled again, and the room froze. Jake stepped inside, his boots heavy on the floor. His dark hair was cropped short, his jaw set, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Earl. For a moment, time stopped. Father and son, estranged by years and unspoken truths, locked gazes. Earl's lips parted, but no words came. Jake's heart thundered, a mix of rage and something softer, something like love. "Who the hell are you?" Trey snapped, stepping toward Jake, oblivious to the storm he'd just invited. Jake didn't answer. Not with words. His eyes flicked to the red mark on Earl's cheek, and something inside him snapped. The angels filed in behind him, their presence a wall of menace. The diner, once a haven, was now a powder keg. Earl's voice, gravelly but steady, broke the silence. Jake. Just one word, but it carried a lifetime regret. Pride. Hope. Jake's throat tightened. He hadn't heard his father say his name like that in years. Not since before the fight. Before Jake came out. Before Earl's old-school values clashed with the truth of who his son was. Trey laughed. A cruel, barking sound. Oh, this is rich. The old man's got a fairy for a son. He stepped closer, cracking his knuckles. You here to cry for daddy? Tough guy? Jake's fists clenched, but he didn't move. Not yet. The angels shifted, ready, but Jake held up a hand. This wasn't their fight. Not entirely. He looked at Earl, searching for the man who'd taught him to throw a punch, to stand up, to be fearless. And there he was, in those steady blue eyes, still there despite the years. Get out, Jake said, his voice low. Dangerous. Or you won't walk out. Trey smirked, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He didn't know Jake. Didn't know the fire that burned in him, forged by years of rejection, of fighting to be seen, of loving in a world that didn't always love back. And he didn't know Earl, the man who'd survived wars and heartbreak, who was only now learning what it meant to fight for his son. The diner held its breath. The jukebox clicked, switching to a low, haunting tune. Outside, the neon sign flickered again, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. This was no ordinary night. This was a reckoning. Trey's smirk faltered as Jake's words hung in the air, sharp as a blade. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, amplifying the tension that crackled between the men. Jake stood rooted, his broad shoulders squared, the Hell's Angels behind him a silent promise of chaos if Trey pushed too far. Earl watched, his coffee forgotten, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and pride. His boy's boy was here, standing tall, unafraid. But the years of distance between them loomed like a canyon, and Earl wondered if they'd ever bridge it. Trey, sensing the shift in the room, tried to reclaim control. You think you scare me, biker boy. He spat, stepping closer to Jake. His buddies, three rough types in flannel and work boots, edged forward, their eyes darting nervously to the angels. You and your fairy dad can take your pride bullshit somewhere else. Jake's jaw tightened, but he didn't swing. Not yet. He'd learned restraint the hard way. Bar fights, arrests, nights in county lockup. The angels had taught him to pick his battles, to channel the rage that had simmered since he was a teen, kicked out of the house at 17 for loving who he loved. But this wasn't just about him. It was about Earl, the man who'd raised him, who'd once been his hero, who'd broken his heart. Last chance, Jake said, his voice a low growl. Walk away. Trey laughed, but it was hollow. He turned to Earl, pointing a meaty finger. You raised a real winner, old man. Bet you're proud. The words were a dagger, and Earl flinched, the weight of his past mistakes crashing down. He'd spent years wrestling with Jake's truth, his own prejudices rooted in a different time, a different war. He'd pushed Jake away, called him names he couldn't take back. And yet, here Jake was, defending him. Earl stood, slow but deliberate, his bad leg aching from the shrapnel wound that never fully healed. You don't know my son, he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. The diner went silent, even the jukebox seeming to pause. You don't know what he's fought for, what he's worth. Jake's eyes flicked to Earl, surprise flashing across his face. It was the first time in years he'd heard his father speak of him with anything like pride. For a moment. The diner. Trey. The angels, all of it faded. It was just them, father and son, seeing each other anew. Trey, oblivious to the moment, shoved Earl back into the booth. Sit down, Grandpa. That was the mistake. Jake moved like lightning, grabbing Trey's arm and twisting it behind his back, slamming him against the counter. The angels stepped forward, their boots heavy, but Jake shook his head. This one's mine. Trey's buddies lunged, but the angels were faster. In seconds, the diner erupted into controlled chaos grunts, the scrape of boots, a chair clattering to the floor. The angels didn't throw punches, just held Trey's crew back, their presence enough to quell any real fight. Jake leaned close to Trey, his voice a whisper. You touch my dad again, you're done. Trey, pinned and panting, nodded frantically. Jake released him, and Trey stumbled back, his bravado gone. Let's go, he muttered to his buddies, and they scrambled for the door, the bell jangling as they fled into the night. The diner settled, the tension easing like a held breath released. Sally, the waitress, emerged from behind the counter, her eyes wide but grateful. You okay, Earl? She asked, her voice soft. Earl nodded, but his gaze was on Jake, who was brushing off his jacket, avoiding his father's eyes. Jake, Earl said again, softer this time. Jake hesitated, then turned, his expression guarded. The angels hung back, giving them space, their loyalty to Jake unspoken but clear. The old woman in the corner resumed her knitting, the needles clicking like a metronome, grounding the moment. Why'd you come? Earl asked, his voice raw. After everything, why? Jake's jaw worked, emotions warring behind his eyes. Sally called. Said you were in trouble. He paused, then added, quieter. Didn't know if you'd want me here. Earl's chest ached. He'd spent so long building walls against Jake, against himself. I always wanted you here, he said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. I just didn't know how to say it. Jake looked away, his throat bobbing. The diner felt smaller now, the world shrinking to the space between them. Sally poured fresh coffee, her way of giving them time. The angels murmured among themselves, their respect for Jake evident in their quiet watchfulness. Outside, the neon sign buzzed, casting its glow across the lot where Jake's Harley waited. He could leave now, ride back to his life, to the road that had become his home. But something held him. Maybe it was Earl's eyes, so like his own. Maybe it was the pin on Earl's jacket, a silent apology for years of silence. Sit, Earl said, gesturing to the booth. Just stay a while. Jake hesitated, then slid into the seat across from his father. The angels took up spots at the counter, their laughter low as Sally served them pie. For the first time in years, Jake and Earl were in the same room, breathing the same air, no walls between them. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. The coffee steamed between them, a fragile bridge in the silence. Jake traced the edge of the chipped mug, his fingers rough from years of wrenching bikes and throwing punches. Earl sat across, his hands folded, the rainbow pin glinting faintly under the diner's lights. Neither spoke for a long moment, the weight of 3 years apart pressing down like a storm cloud. You kept the pin, Jake said finally, his voice low, almost accusing. He'd sent it to Earl after their last fight, a desperate gesture before he'd roared out of town on his Harley. He hadn't expected Earl to keep it, let alone wear it. Earl's fingers brushed the pin, his touch reverent. Didn't know if you'd ever see it, he admitted. But it felt right. His voice cracked, betraying the emotion he'd spent a lifetime burying. Jake, I was wrong. About a lot. Jake's chest tightened, He wanted to believe it, wanted to trust the man who'd once been his world. But the memory of that night, Earl's voice, cold and sharp, saying, "You're not my son," still burned. He'd spent years rebuilding himself, finding strength in the angels, in the open road, in loving men without shame. But Earl's words had left scars that even leather couldn't cover. "Wrong don't fix it," Jake said, his tone harder than he meant. "You threw me out, Dad. 17. No place to go. You think a pin makes up for that?" Earl winced, the lines on his face deepening. "No, it don't." He leaned forward, his eyes pleading. "I was a fool, Jake. Raised in a time when I thought I knew what a man was supposed to be. But I failed you. And I've been paying for it every damn day since." The sincerity hit Jake like a punch. He looked away, out the diner's window where the neon sign flickered, casting red and blue across the lot. The angels were at the counter, joking with Sally, their voices a low hum. They were his family now, but sitting here, across from Earl, Jake felt the pull of something older, something he'd thought was lost. "You remember the lake?" Earl asked suddenly, his voice softer. "You were 10, maybe 11. Caught that trout, bigger than your arm. You wouldn't stop grinning." Jake's lips twitched, the memory sharp and vivid. "You cooked it over that shitty campfire. Tasted like ash." Earl chuckled, a rough, rusty sound. "Yeah, I was never much of a cook." His smile faded. "Those were good days, Jake. Before I messed it up." The jukebox kicked on, playing a slow Patsy Cline tune, its melancholy notes filling the diner. Jake leaned back, his leather jacket creaking. He wanted to stay angry, to hold on to the hurt. It was easier than forgiving, easier than risking more pain. But Earl's eyes, so tired yet so earnest, made it hard to keep the walls up. "Why now?" Jake asked. "Why wear the pin now? After all this time?" Earl took a shaky breath. "When your mom died, I shut down. Couldn't face the world. Couldn't face you. Thought I was protecting you by being hard, by pushing you to be someone you weren't. But then I saw you on the news, at that Pride March in Columbus. You were so alive. So you. And I realized I'd been the one who was wrong, not you." Jake's throat burned. He remembered that march, the heat of the sun, the weight of 1,000 eyes, the freedom of being himself. He hadn't known Earl was watching, hadn't known he cared. Sally approached, setting down 2 slices of cherry pie, her smile gentle. "On the house," she said, then retreated, giving them space. The pie sat untouched, a small gesture in a moment too big for words. "I don't know how to fix this," Earl said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to try, if you'll let me." Jake stared at the pie, the red filling glistening like a wound. He thought of the years on the road, the nights spent wondering if his father hated him. He thought of the angels, who'd taken him in when he had nothing. And he thought of Earl, sitting here, wearing that pin, risking a thug slap to show it. "I don't know either," Jake admitted, his voice rough. "But I'm here, ain't I?" Earl's eyes glistened, and for the first time in years, Jake saw the man who'd carried him on his shoulders, who'd taught him to ride a bike, who'd loved him before fear and pride got in the way. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was enough to keep him in the booth, to keep him talking. Outside, the night deepened, the neon sign a beacon in the dark. The angels' laughter mixed with the jukebox's hum, and for a moment, the diner felt like home again. Not the home it had been, but the one it could be if they both kept trying. The cherry pie sat untouched, its sweetness a stark contrast to the bitter weight of the moment. Jake's fingers drummed on the table, a restless rhythm born of years running from this very conversation. Earl watched him, his hand still, his heart racing like it hadn't since the jungles of Vietnam. The diner's hum-clinking dishes, the angel's low chatter, the jukebox's soft croon felt like a fragile cocoon around them, holding the world at bay. "You ever think about her?" Jake asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. "Mom. I mean." Earl's breath caught. Mary's face flashed in his mind, her laugh, her gentle touch, the way she'd always known how to bridge the gap between him and Jake. "Every day?" he said, his voice thick. "She'd have known what to say to you. To us. She was better at this than me." Jake nodded, his eyes distant. "She'd have kicked your ass for what you said to me." A faint smile tugged at his lips, but it faded fast. "She knew. You know. Before I did. Told me once. Love who you love. Jake. Just don't hide it." I was too scared to listen. Earl's chest ached. Mary had been the heart of their family, the one who'd held them together. When she died cancer, quick and cruel, Earl had crumbled. He'd turned his grief into anger, his fear into judgment, and Jake had paid the price. "I should have listened to her too," Earl said. "Instead, I drove you away." Jake leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his gaze piercing. "You didn't just drive me away, Dad. You told me I was a mistake, that I wasn't your son. You think I forgot that?" The words landed like a grenade, and Earl felt the shrapnel tear through him. He remembered that night, the rain pounding the roof, Jake standing in the doorway with a duffel bag, his eyes red but defiant. Earl had been drunk on whiskey and pain, his world unraveling without Mary. He'd lashed out, and Jake had left. For 3 years. That moment had haunted him, a ghost he couldn't outrun. "I was wrong," Earl said, his voice breaking. "I was scared, Jake. Scared of losing you, of not understanding you. But that's no excuse. I'd give anything to take it back." Jake's jaw tightened, his hands balling into fists. "You don't get it, do you? It wasn't just that night. It was every day after. Every time I called and you didn't answer. Every letter I sent that came back unopened. I thought you hated me." Earl's eyes burned, tears he hadn't shed in years threatening to spill. "I never hated you. I hated myself. For failing you. For not being the father you needed." The diner's lights flickered, casting shadows across Jake's face. He looked older now, the boy Earl remembered buried under years of hard living. But those eyes, Mary's eyes, were still there, full of fire and hurt and something else. Hope, maybe. Or the ghost of it. One of the angels, a burly man named Rico with a graying beard, approached the booth. "Jake, we're heading out. You good?" His voice was gruff, but his eyes were kind, scanning Earl with a mix of curiosity and caution. Jake nodded, his gaze still on Earl. "Yeah, I'm good. Give me a minute." Rico clapped Jake's shoulder and returned to the counter, where the others were finishing their pie. Sally hovered nearby, wiping down tables that didn't need wiping, her way of watching over them. The old woman in the corner, still knitting, glanced up, her eyes soft with understanding. The diner was a stage, and they were all players in a story unfolding. "You got a new family now," Earl said, nodding toward the angels. "They seem like good people." Jake's lips quirked. "They're rough, but they're mine. Took me in when I had nothing. Didn't care who I loved, just that I had their back." He paused, then added, "But they ain't you." Earl's heart stuttered. He wanted to reach across the table, to grab Jake's hand, to pull him close like he had when Jake was a boy. But he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he said, "I'm proud of you, Jake. I should have said it sooner. I'm proud of who you are." Jake's breath hitched, his eyes glistening. He looked away, out the window where the stars were starting to show. "Don't say that unless you mean it," he said, his voice rough. I can't do this again if you don't." "I mean it," Earl said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "I see you now. All of you. And I'm proud." The jukebox clicked, switching to a softer tune, a ballad about love and loss. Jake rubbed his eyes, hiding the tears he didn't want Earl to see. For the first time in years, the silence between them wasn't heavy with anger. It was heavy with possibility. "Let's eat this pie," Jake said finally, picking up a fork. "Mom always said pie fixes everything." Earl laughed, a small, broken sound, and grabbed his own fork. They ate in silence, the sweetness of the cherries a small victory in a night full of battles. Outside, the neon sign glowed steady now, a beacon in the dark, guiding them toward something new. The pie was gone, crumbs scattered across the plates like the remnants of their broken years. Jake leaned back in the booth, his leather jacket creaking, his eyes still wary but softer now. Earl sipped his coffee, the warmth grounding him as he searched for the right words. The diner felt like a bubble, shielding them from the world outside, where time and pain waited to reclaim them. "You still ride?" Earl asked, breaking the silence. He'd taught Jake to ride a motorcycle at 15, a beat-up Yamaha they'd fixed together in the garage. Those were the days before everything fractured, when laughter came easy. Jake's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. "Every day? Got a Harley now. She's my freedom." He paused, then added, "You still got that old Yamaha?" Earl nodded. "In the shed. Haven't touched it since, well, since you left." He didn't say it, but the memory hung between them, Jake's hands covered in grease, Earl passing him tools, the two of them lost in the rhythm of repair. It was the last time they'd felt like a team. "Maybe we could fix it up," Jake said, almost too quiet to hear. "You know, for old time's sake." Earl's heart leapt, but he kept his face steady. "I'd like that." The moment stretched, fragile but real. Sally refilled their coffee, her smile warm but unobtrusive. The Angels were outside now, their bikes lined up in the lot, engines rumbling as they prepared to leave. Rico poked his head in, nodding to Jake. "We're rolling out. You coming? Or you staying?" Jake glanced at Earl, then back at Rico. "I'll catch up. Got some things to settle here." Rico grinned, a knowing look in his eyes. "Take your time, brother." The door jangled as he left, the Angels' engines fading into the night. The diner felt emptier without them, but the absence made the space between Jake and Earl feel smaller, more intimate. "You didn't have to come back," Earl said, his voice low. "After what I did, most wouldn't." Jake's fingers tightened around his mug. "I almost didn't. Kept telling myself you didn't deserve it. But Sally's call, it hit me hard. Made me remember the good stuff. The fishing trips, the bike rides. You weren't always an asshole, Dad." Earl chuckled, the sound rough but genuine. "Fair enough." He leaned forward, his eyes searching Jake's. "But I need you to know something. I'm not that man anymore. I've been reading, learning. Went to a Pride event last year, just to see. Felt like a damn fool, standing there alone. But I saw what you've been fighting for. And I get it now." Jake's breath caught. He'd spent so long believing Earl was lost to him, a relic of a world that didn't understand. But here he was, an 81-year-old veteran, wearing a rainbow pin, talking about Pride events. It was almost too much to process. "You went to Pride?" Jake asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Earl's cheeks reddened, but he nodded. "Didn't tell nobody." Didn't want to make a big deal. But I saw folks like you happy. Free. Made me wish I'd done better by you. Jake looked down, his throat tight. He'd built a life without Earl. Found love with a man named Lucas. Found purpose with the angels. But the hole where his father had been never fully closed. Now, sitting here, he felt the edges of that hole start to mend. Just a little. What's he like? Earl asked suddenly. The guy you're with. Jake's eyes widened, then softened. Lucas. He's good. Works as a mechanic. Loves old cars. Got a laugh that makes you forget the world's a mess. He hesitated, then added, he'd like you, I think, if you gave him a chance. Earl nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. I'd like to meet him, if that's okay. Jake's heart thudded. It was a simple request, but it felt like a leap across the canyon that had separated them. Yeah, he said, his voice rough. Maybe. The jukebox switched to a Bruce Springsteen song, its raw chords filling the diner with a sense of longing. Sally dimmed the lights slightly, signaling closing time, but she didn't rush them. The old woman in the corner packed up her knitting, offering Jake a nod as she left. The world outside was quiet now, the neon sign the only light in the darkness. We got a lot to figure out, Jake said, his voice steady but heavy. This don't fix everything. I know, Earl said, but it's a start. And I ain't going nowhere. Jake nodded, the weight of the night settling into his bones. He wasn't sure what came next, but for the first time in years, he wasn't running from it. The diner, with its cracked booths and flickering lights, had become a crossroads, a place where past and future collided, where a father and son could begin again. The diner's clock ticked past midnight, its hands moving as slowly as the conversation between Jake and Earl. The coffee had gone cold, but neither noticed, too caught in the fragile dance of rebuilding what had been broken. Outside, the neon sign cast a steady glow, its hum a quiet heartbeat in the night. Jake shifted in the booth, his leather jacket creaking. You ever think about what you'd say to me if you got the chance? He asked, his voice low, almost daring Earl to answer. Earl's hands stilled on his mug, his eyes distant. Every night, he said. Used to sit on the porch, staring at the stars, rehearsing it. Never got it right. Always sounded empty. Jake's chest tightened. He'd spent those same nights on the road, the rumble of his Harley drowning out the ache of his father's absence. He'd imagined this moment too, but it was always angry, full of accusations. Now, sitting here, the anger was still there, but it was softer, tangled with hope. Say it now, Jake said, his voice steady but heavy. Whatever it is. Earl took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. I'm sorry, Jake. For the words I said, for the years I stole from us. I was scared of losing you, so I pushed you. Stupidest thing I ever did. He paused, his voice breaking. You're my son. Always will be. And I love you, no matter who you love. The words hit Jake like a wave, crashing through the walls he'd built. He blinked hard, fighting the burn in his eyes. He'd waited so long to hear this, but now that it was here, it felt too big, too raw. You mean that? He asked, his voice rough. With everything I got, Earl said, his eyes locked on Jake's. I ain't perfect. Never was. But I'm here now, and I ain't running. Jake nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He looked out the window, where the stars were bright against the Ohio sky. He thought of Lucas, waiting back at their apartment in Columbus, probably cursing Jake for not texting. He thought of the angels, who'd stood by him tonight. And he thought of Earl, who was trying, really trying, to be the father he hadn't been. Sally approached, her apron smudged with flour. "You boys need anything else?" she asked, her voice gentle. Jake shook his head. "We're good, Sal. Thanks." She smiled, then hesitated. "Earl, you tell him about the letter yet?" Earl's face flushed, and Jake's eyes narrowed. "What letter?" Earl sighed, reaching into his jacket. He said, sliding it across the table. "Never sent it. Didn't know if you'd want it." Jake stared at the envelope, his name scrawled in Earl's shaky handwriting. He didn't open it. Not yet. It felt like a bomb, one that could either heal or destroy. "What's in it?" he asked, his voice low. "Everything I couldn't say," Earl replied. "Everything I should have said." Jake's fingers brushed the envelope, but he didn't pick it up. Instead, he looked at Earl, searching for the truth in his father's eyes. He found it there: regret, love, a plea for forgiveness. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was enough to keep him here, in this booth, in this moment. The jukebox clicked off, leaving the diner in near silence. Sally began stacking chairs, her way of signaling it was time to close. Jake glanced at his phone: 3 missed calls from Lucas. He'd have to call him soon, explain where he'd been, why he'd stayed. "You got a place to crash?" Jake asked Earl, his tone casual but laced with concern. Earl nodded. "Same old house. Your room's still there. Haven't changed a thing." Jake's heart twisted. He hadn't been back to that house since he was 17, since the night he'd left with nothing but a bag and a broken heart. The thought of stepping through that door again was both terrifying and tempting. "Maybe I'll swing by," Jake said, testing the words. "See that Yamaha?" Earl's face lit up, a spark of hope in his tired eyes. "Anytime, son. Anytime." They stood, the booth creaking as they rose. Sally waved them off, her smile warm. "Don't be strangers," she called as they stepped into the cool night air. The neon sign buzzed above, its glow a promise of something better. Jake straddled his Harley, the engine rumbling to life. Earl stood by the diner door, his hands in his pockets, watching his son. For the first time in years, they didn't feel like strangers. They felt like family, fractured but fighting to heal. The Harley's rumble faded as Jake pulled onto the highway, the diner's neon glow shrinking in his rearview mirror. The night air was sharp, cutting through his jacket, but it couldn't touch the warmth in his chest. Earl's words, "I love you, no matter who you love," echoed in his mind, a lifeline he hadn't known he needed. The envelope, tucked inside his jacket, felt like a heartbeat against his ribs. He didn't head straight home. Instead, he rode past the old house, the one he hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades. It stood unchanged, a small brick rancher with a sagging porch and a yard overgrown with weeds. The shed in the back, where the Yamaha waited, was barely visible in the moonlight. Jake slowed but didn't stop. Not yet. He needed time, and so did Earl. Back at the diner, Earl walked home, his bad leg aching with every step. The town was quiet, its streets empty save for the occasional stray cat. He clutched his jacket, the rainbow pin a small weight that felt heavier than it should. He'd meant every word he'd said to Jake, but the fear lingered. What if it wasn't enough? At home, Earl sank into his armchair, the same one Mary had loved. Mary's favorite quilt draped over the couch. He hadn't changed much since she died, as if keeping things the same could keep her close. But Jake had been the one thing he couldn't hold on to. He pulled out his phone, an old flip model he barely understood, and stared at the screen. He wanted to call Jake, to say more, but he didn't. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of letters, all unsent, all addressed to Jake. The one he'd given Jake tonight was just the latest. The others, written over years, were confessions, apologies, pleas for a second chance. He hadn't had the courage to send them, but maybe now, he could start. Miles away, Jake pulled into the lot of his apartment in Columbus. Lucas was waiting on the steps, his dark hair mussed, his arms crossed. "You didn't call," he said, but his tone was more worried than angry. Jake cut the engine and swung off the bike. "Sorry. Got caught up." Lucas raised an eyebrow, taking in Jake's tense posture, the envelope peeking out of his jacket. "Your dad?" Jake nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah. He's trying. Said he's proud of me. Gave me this." He pulled out the envelope, holding it like it might burn him. Lucas stepped closer, his hand resting on Jake's arm. "You read it yet?" "Nah. Not ready." Jake leaned into Lucas, the familiar warmth grounding him. He wore a rainbow pin. Luke took a slap for it. Lucas whistled low. "That's something. You gonna see him again?" Jake hesitated, then nodded. "Think so. Maybe fix up an old bike with him. See where it goes." Lucas smiled, his eyes soft. "That's a start. Come on, let's get inside. You look like you need a beer." Inside, the apartment was a mess of tools and car magazines, a testament to Lucas's love for fixing things. Jake sank onto the couch, the envelope still in his hand. Lucas sat beside him, close but not crowding, giving him space to breathe. "You don't have to read it now," Lucas said. "But when you do, I'm here." Jake nodded, grateful for the quiet strength Lucas always offered. He thought of Earl, alone in that house, and felt a pang of guilt. He'd spent so long running from his father, from the pain, but tonight had shifted something. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a crack in the wall, letting light through. Back at the house, Earl lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He thought of Jake's eyes, so like Mary's, and the way they'd softened when he'd said, "I love you." He thought of the diner, of Trey's slap, of Jake walking in with the angels like some kind of avenging force. He'd been proud, so damn proud, even if he hadn't known how to say it then. The next morning, Earl woke early, the ache in his leg a dull reminder of the night before. He shuffled to the shed, pulling the tarp off the Yamaha. It was rusted, neglected, but fixable. Like him and Jake. He ran a hand over the handlebars, picturing Jake at 15, grinning as they'd roared down back roads together. He didn't know if Jake would come back, but for the first time in years, he hoped. And that hope, small as it was, felt like enough. The sun rose over the small Ohio town, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Jake woke to the smell of coffee, Lucas already tinkering in the kitchen. The envelope sat on the coffee table, unopened but heavy with promise. Jake stared at it, his heart a tangle of fear and curiosity. He wasn't ready to read it. Not yet, but he carried it with him as he headed out, the Harley's rumble of familiar comfort. He rode to Earl's house, the streets quiet in the early light. The old rancher looked smaller in the day, its flaws softened by the morning glow. Jake parked and stood, his boots crunching on the gravel drive. The shed door was open, and there was Earl, bent over the Yamaha, a wrench in his hand, his face creased with focus. "You started without me," Jake called, his voice lighter than he felt. Earl looked up, his eyes brightening. "Couldn't sleep. Figured I'd get a head start." He gestured to the bike, its rusted frame gleaming with fresh oil. She's still got life in her. Jake stepped into the shed, the smell of grease and metal taking him back. He grabbed a rag, wiping down the handlebars, falling into the old rhythm without thinking. They worked in silence for a while, The clink of tools and the occasional grunt, the only sounds. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. You read the letter? Earl asked, not looking up. Jake shook his head. Not yet. Soon. He paused, then added, didn't need to yet. You being here, doing this, it's enough for now. Earl nodded, a small smile breaking through. Fair enough. They worked through the morning, the Yamaha slowly coming to life. Jake told Earl about Lucas, about the angels, about the life he'd built. Earl listened, really listened, his questions careful but genuine. Jake felt the years slip away, not gone but less heavy, like a wound finally starting to heal. By noon, the bike was running, its engine a low purr. Jake straddled it, revving it gently, a grin spreading across his face. Want to take her for a spin? He asked. Earl laughed, the sound full and free. My riding days are done, son. But you go. Show her what you got. Jake roared down the street, the wind in his face, the bike alive beneath him. He thought of Earl, of the diner, of the slap that had brought them back together. He thought of Trey, a bully whose cruelty had sparked something better. And he thought of the letter, still unopened, but no longer a weight. Back at the house, Earl watched Jake ride, his heart full. He'd lost so much Mary. Time. Jake, but he hadn't lost everything. The rainbow pin glinted on his jacket, a promise kept. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he'd fight for it. For Jake. For the family they could still be. Jake returned, his grin wide, his eyes bright. She's good, he said, cutting the engine. We did good. Yeah, Earl said, his voice thick. We did. They stood together, the bike between them, the sun high overhead. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a beginning. And in that small Ohio town, in a shed filled with memories, that was enough.